أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين والعاقبة للمتقين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على عبدك ورسولك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. So alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, as I said, over this set of halaqas, inshallah ta'ala, this set of a few, you really get to understand how Islam came to Medina as a whole. And so far, we have covered, the last full episode of season 1 was of course Mus'ab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Mus'ab radiallahu ta'ala anhu being paired off with the first amongst the Ansar. Who was that man? I want these names to be so automatic to you that you could rehearse this throughout Ramadan, the way that you rehearse or recite surahs of the Quran. So who's the man from Medina, first person? Oh, please don't do this to me. We just talked about him a couple of weeks ago. Sa'd Ibn Zurara, the first Muslim from Medina is Sa'd Ibn Zurara radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, leads the bay'ah, gives his allegiance to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then brings back the Ansar to become the Ansar that we know them. Then Mus'ab and Sa'd are in a place together, and as they are starting to teach these people Islam, there's a man that comes to the gathering angry, upset, and Sa'd tells Mus'ab, if this man becomes Muslim, a lot of people are going to become Muslim. So make sure that you get this one right. Who was that man? Sa'd Ibn Hudayr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who we spoke about. So it's all coming from this garden, right? Sa'd, Mus'ab, and Sa'd Ibn Hudayr comes. Now, the person who sent Sa'd Ibn Hudayr was the man that we are talking about today, inshallah ta'ala. And from just the pure virtue perspective, the virtues of this man are truly unique in that the things that the Prophet ﷺ said about this man in terms of his miracles, he did not say about any other companion. You know, when you talk about the firsts, in terms of the first achievement or the first person to do this or that, there are many of those, but there are very few people who have these virtues that are unique to them, and the Prophet ﷺ did not mention them for anyone else, and that is the man that we're talking about tonight, Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So I want you to understand something, inshallah ta'ala, again from the build out from Sa'd Ibn Zurara. Sa'd Ibn Zurara was from what tribe? Anyone remember? There's Aus and Khazraj. Okay, so he's from the bigger one. Which one was the bigger one? Khazraj is the bigger one. So Sa'd is from Khazraj. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh is from Aus, the other tribe, but he is the maternal cousin of Sa'd ibn Zurara. Okay, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh is actually his cousin through the mother of Sa'd ibn Zurara. So there is a maternal link there, and these are two men that are looking to end what has happened after the Bu'ath wars, after so many people have passed away in Bu'ath. Inshallah ta'ala, I just want to remind the kids not in front of the camera, inshallah ta'ala. So remember that it was these young men that wanted to end it all, right? So you have Sa'd ibn Mu'adh and you have Sa'd ibn Zurara. Now Sa'd sends Sa'd ibn Hudayr to this gathering with Sa'd ibn Zurara because he says, listen, if I show up there, it's going to be a scene, it's going to be fitna because we're cousins and this is going to be a Aus and Khazraj thing. So he said, why don't you go there, see what Mus'ab and Sa'd are doing and put an end to this nonsense, right? Sa'd ibn Hudayr goes, Sa'd ibn Hudayr comes back to Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh looks at him and says, Wallahi, he's coming back to us with a face different than the one that he left with. Something happened to him. He's been transformed. Now, this is where we enter into the picture of this man, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, as we said, is from the Aus tribe, and he is the son of a man by the name of An-Nu'man. So Sa'd ibn Mu'adh ibn Nu'man. So Mu'adh ibn Nu'man, who was of course one of the leaders of the tribe, died prior to this incident. So he is someone that has perished in the battles that took place before. Remember, this is the case of all of these Ansar. On the mother's side, he's the son of a woman by the name of Kabsha bint Rafi'. And she was from one of the Jewish clans, Banu al-Harith, of the Khazraj tribe. Okay? So his mother was from Khazraj, and this is again where you start to see the relationships taking place. Now, he is married to a woman by the name of Hind bint Simak, and this was the widow actually of his older brother Aus, who was named Aus, who passed away. And they had two sons, Amr and Abdullah. His son Amr, remember we said Sa'd ibn Zurara, his lineage did not continue. As for Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, he had a son, Amr, who had 9 sons. So the lineage of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh actually is quite vast. And there are many people that trace their lineage back, tribes later on that trace their lineage back to this man, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So he's related to Sa'd ibn Zurara. He is related to Usayd ibn Hudayr. And when he converts to Islam, as we'll see, his mother, his siblings, his wife, his children, they all convert to Islam as well. So you go back to this incident, right? Now Sa'd is considered the senior amongst them. And remember, being the senior amongst them doesn't mean you're that old. How old do you think he was? He's about 31 years old. Okay? He would have been about 31, and he's considered their elder. Okay? Senior, known for his presence, and really looked towards to bring peace to Yathrib after all that had happened. Sa'd was a wise man. He was a person that immediately commanded respect in a gathering. And this is a description of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiyallahu ta'ala anhu in that regard, that when Sa'd ibn Mu'adh walked into a gathering, he was a sayyid. You knew that he was a leader amongst the people. He had a presence to him radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So remember, he was the one that sent Usayd ibn Hudayr to go check on the gathering and stop this. Usayd comes back, and here's what Usayd ibn Hudayr does. Does Usayd come back to him and say, I think you should listen to what Mus'ab has to say, I think you should go and listen as well? No, actually Usayd ibn Hudayr, he comes back to him and he says, أَوَقَدْ سَمِعْتَ? Did you hear? He said, no, what are you talking about? He said, did you hear? He said, no, what are you talking about? And he said, there are these people from Banu al-Harith, and they want to do such and such to your cousin Sa'd ibn Zurara. So remember, he sent Usayd to check on the gathering and to put an end to what Sa'd ibn Zurara and Mus'ab were doing, because he didn't want to make it a thing by him going himself. Usayd now is playing on his attachment to his cousin, and he's not telling him exactly what's happening, but he's making it seem like someone has apprehended his cousin, like something bad is happening to Sa'd ibn Zurara. So what does Sa'd ibn Mu'adh do? Sa'd ibn Mu'adh goes rushing towards that place to now save Sa'd ibn Zurara. He gets there, and what does he find? He finds Sa'd ibn Zurara with Mus'ab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and they're still teaching the people Islam. Mus'ab, who just earlier that day, Usayd was coming with his sword or his spear to take care of him, and angry, and Sa'd ibn Zurara said, that man is coming. This is a sayyid from his people. If you do well with him, then a lot of people are going to become Muslim. Now you've got Sa'd ibn Mu'adh walking towards Mus'ab, angry as well, wanting to do harm to him. And As'ad is like, this man is even higher up, right? So know how you're going to approach this man, be patient. And Sa'd ibn Mu'adh just makes the assumption that Mus'ab is part of this plot against As'ad. He comes into the gathering angry. What is going on? Mus'ab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu says to him, nothing is wrong. Why don't you have a seat and just listen to what we have to say? And if you don't like what I have to say, then I'll be out of here. But at the same time, just give it a chance. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh sees that As'ad is okay, and Mus'ab has won him over already. He puts his weapons down, he sits down, he listens to him. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh says, this is beautiful, how do I become Muslim? So Sa'd embraces Islam right away. Alright, so Mus'ab has won over in that same span of time, right? Usayd and now Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So Mus'ab explains to him the process. Sa'd radiyallahu ta'ala anhu goes, he does ghusl, he comes back, he takes shahada, he prays 2 rak'ahs, and then he goes back to his people. SubhanAllah, when he comes back to his people, they say about him, Sa'd is coming back to us and his face has changed. Like, what's happening? We keep sending people over there and they're coming back with their faces changed. Like the same look on his face that Usayd had, like Sa'd is back now, and he has that same look on his face. He's come to us with a different expression. Except Sa'd is going to do a different approach. Okay? Sa'd radiyallahu ta'ala anhu is not going to take anyone else with him at the moment. Sa'd radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he stands up and he says, Ya Bani Abdul Ashhal. He calls out to his people. Remember, he's the leader of his tribe. Ya Bani Abdul Ashhal. So they all gather around him. Remember when the Prophet ﷺ stood on Safa, called his people to him. Just so you can see the difference between the people in Medina at that time and their readiness, right? And what did the Prophet ﷺ do? He called them to remember his qualities. And the Prophet ﷺ has the greatest qualities, as-Sadiq al-Amin, right? The truthful and the honest one. So he says, Ya Bani Abd al-Ashhal. And they say, Labbaik, we're here. He says, Kayfa ta'lamuna amri fikum? How do you see me amongst you? It's common in those times, by the way, that a chief will want to hear his praise just because, right? But this is for a different reason. So they say, Sayyiduna wa afdaluna wa aymanuna naqiba. The best of us, the leader of us, the most trustworthy of us. You are the one that we look to for all of our affairs. Now what does he do with them? After he acknowledges those nice words, Sa'd radiallahu anhu says, then listen up. Inna kalamakum alayya haram. وَرِجَالَكُمْ وَنِسَاءُكُمْ حَتَّى تُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. He said, listen, not a single one of you speak to me ever again until you believe in Allah and His Messenger. It's like, whoa, where did this come from? So this is his way of imparting urgency upon them. Like you just mentioned your dependency upon me as your leader. He says, I am not going to talk to any of you or come near any of you, your men or your women, until you believe in Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they're kind of shocked by the statement. It was meant to provoke something inside of them, like this is urgent. And so they asked him, what does it mean to believe in Allah and His Messenger? What are you talking about? And so he conveyed to him the Islam that he learned in those few moments. There's something that Allah Azza wa Jal put that was special in that place. And so at that time, in that moment, in that one gathering, ما بقي من بني عبد الأشهر رجل وامرأة إلا مسلم أو مسلمة. Every single person in that gathering became Muslim. Instantaneously. This is all happening in the same day. So it started off with Mus'ab and As'ad, a handful of people, then Usayd ibn Hudayr, and now the chief of Aus. And the chief of Aus went back to his people, and his people have all embraced Islam in the same day. And there's one more person, which is Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, radiyallahu anhu, we'll talk about next week, inshallah ta'ala. And that sort of completes all of Medina. As'ad and the two Sa'ds, you get all of Medina. Just like that. So after that, Sa'd radiyallahu ta'ala anhu ibn Mu'adh, he comes back. So this leads to a mass conversion in Medina. Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu is one of those who comes back to take bay'ah with the Prophet ﷺ, bay'atul aqaba, to take the pledge of aqaba with the Prophet ﷺ, and he is appointed as a naqib as well. He is appointed as a chief as well. Now Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in this situation, there's an interesting incident that happens. Sa'd, and it was common that some of the leaders of Medina, of Yathrib, had ties to some of the leaders in Mecca. Okay? You'll see this with the two Sa'ds, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh and Sa'd ibn Ubadah next week, that they had some connections with some of the very same people that were oppressing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, when he went there, he says to his trade partner and his friend, who is none other than Umayyah ibn Khalaf. Umayyah ibn Khalaf was his key trade partner. When Umayyah used to come to Medina, to Yathrib at the time, Sa'd was the one that would be his host. And when Sa'd comes to Mecca, he's hosted by Umayyah ibn Khalaf. Now Umayyah ibn Khalaf is not a very good person, right? Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that's all you have to say, right? The tormentor of Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, a man who carried out all sorts of atrocities and persecution against the Muslims. But here, right, Sa'd is using his alliance, and he says to him, listen, he says, what's a time that the Kaaba is empty, that the Haram is empty? Because I want to go do Umrah, right? They're still maintaining that trade partnership. Remember, these people were opportunists at the end of the day, right? In Mecca, not the Muslims, I'm talking about in Mecca. So he said, look, give me a time that I can go and do Umrah in peace. Umayyah, who's stopping Muslims in Mecca from doing Umrah, right, from worshipping Allah and persecuting them, he says, yeah, I've got you, don't worry. So he finds a time for him around Dhuhr. As you can imagine, that's a time where it's pretty hot, right? And he says to him, just come on, you can go and you can do tawaf and do what you have to do. So Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu comes, Umayyah walks out with him. Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu is doing tawaf, and Abu Jahl comes out. and he calls out to Umayyah, Ya Aba Safwan, who's this person? So Umayyah ibn Khalaf says, he's Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, like calm down. Abu Jahl looks at Sa'd and he said, you think you can walk around in safety in Mecca after having given safety to our fugitive? You go and you shelter our people that have fled from us, and you think you can do tawaf around our Kaaba here when you shelter these people who have changed their religion and you support them, you claim to be from their supporters? And he says, Wallahi, if you weren't with Abu Safwan, meaning Umayyah, he said, I'd make sure that your family never sees you again. Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he stands up and he goes up to Abu Jahl and he says to him, Wallahi, if you dared to try to stop me from making tawaf, he said, I would stop you from something that is even more valuable to you. He said, I'd cut off all of your trade caravans to Ash-Sham. Your trade would go nowhere. Caravans would be done. So they get in each other's faces. They're about to fight. Umayyah now has to show his loyalty to Mecca again, right? So Umayyah takes the side of Abu Jahl and he says, لا ترفع صوتك على أبي الحكم. Don't you dare raise your voice on Abu al-Hakam. They called him the father of wisdom, not the father of ignorance. فَإِنَّهُ سَيِّدُ أَهْلِ الْوَادِ. He is the chief of the people of this valley. And then Sa'd starts to argue with Umayyah, and Sa'd says to him, to Umayyah, his friend, he says to him, you are a fool for insisting on this way. He says, فَإِنِّي سَمِعْتُ مُحَمَّدًا صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ يَزْعُمُ أَنَّهُ قَاتِلُكَ. He said, I heard Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that he's going to kill you. Umayyah, and remember, these people know that the Prophet ﷺ is truthful. They know he's truthful. They know that what he has is divine. So Umayyah stops and he says, Iyai? He said, wait, Muhammad ﷺ said he's going to kill me? Sa'd says, yes. Like, wake up. You persecuted him all these years. We took him in. I can't help you. I'm your trade partner. But the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that your death is imminent. So what does he do? He says, Wallahi ma yakdibu Muhammadan idha hadath. Umayyah says, if Muhammad ﷺ said that, he's not lying. He's telling the truth. Umayyah goes home, says to his wife, Ya Safwan, guess what Sa'd said to me? She said, what? He said that Muhammad ﷺ has informed them that I'm going to die, that I'm going to be killed fighting against them. So she said, well, don't ever leave Mecca. Don't go fight him, right? It's common sense. And that's why when Badr happened, Umayyah actually did not want to go out. He actually stayed back, was trying to stay back in Mecca. And what happened? Abu Jahl went and taunted him in front of everybody, stirred him up, and got him to go out in Badr, right? Where both of them would be humiliated, right? Abdullah ibn Mas'ud standing on the chest of Abu Jahl at the end of that battle. Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu standing on the chest of Umayyah ibn Khalaf, just as the Prophet ﷺ had promised, right? But subhanAllah, at that moment, he didn't, because of that incident with Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he did not want to go out to Badr, because he knew that the Prophet ﷺ does not speak lies. And even when the Prophet ﷺ saw them coming, saw the other side, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that there are some people amongst them that are not the same. And he says some of them were just forced to come out with their people. They really were hesitant. They did not want to fight this battle of Badr. Abu Jahl was the arrogant one, the one beating the drums of war, literally, right? And he said that if there's anyone that's doubtful, hesitant, it's in that man. And he pointed to Umayyah, right? Knowing the Prophet ﷺ, knowing that he was forced out. SubhanAllah, look how arrogant these people were to insist upon their ways, to insist upon their idolatry, to insist upon their persecution, knowing that the Prophet ﷺ does not speak a lie. So he's saying to Sa'd, he was sobered from that incident. He said, if Muhammad ﷺ said that, I'm done, right? Then I'm actually going to be killed. So Sa'd was trying to wake him up. It did not happen. Now, the other part of this is that Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu plays a crucial role in Badr. A crucial role in Badr. Okay? SubhanAllah, it's in this that you see the quality of a person. Now, who is greater, As'ad ibn Zurara or Sa'd ibn Mu'adh in terms of the leadership of the Ansar? Actually As'ad, but As'ad is dead, remember? He died right after the Hijrah. Okay, so that's why As'ad ibn Zurara does not live to see Badr. He's the first janazah, right, in Islam. So Sa'd ibn Mu'adh is now the de facto senior of the Ansar as a whole. Okay? It's between Aus and Khazraj. But Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu is looked to as the senior most respected person amongst the Ansar now that As'ad ibn Zurara radiallahu ta'ala anhu has passed away. So the way he goes in Badr is going to largely determine the behavior of the Ansar in Badr as well. Now remember, just to give you some context here, Badr was not a planned battle, right? The Muslims were trying to interrupt the caravans of the Meccans going to Asham, who had stolen their stuff and were going and buying and selling it in Asham, trading with it in Asham. And Abu Sufyan ambushed the Muslims. Badr is not in Medina, it's far away from Al-Madinah. He ambushed the Muslims by actually reading where they were going to plot and then amassing this humongous army to go and to take care of them. So the Muslims were not equipped for a battle here. They didn't have horses, they didn't have camels, they didn't have the weapons of war. They were not ready for this. The Meccans, on the other hand, were fully prepared. They're coming with a much larger army and more camels, more horses, more weapons to take care of them, to wipe them out. So when that happens, the Prophet ﷺ has a choice. The Prophet ﷺ can do his best to flee, or the Prophet ﷺ can occupy the most strategic position that exists in that wilderness, right? And prepare for them. So the Prophet ﷺ chooses, of course, to occupy the wells of Badr, because that gives them a strategic advantage to have the wells there. They could get there first before that large army from Mecca will arrive. However, the Prophet ﷺ does shura, consults with the companions that are around them. So he's sitting with the Sahaba, and I want you to imagine this now. Muhajirin and Ansar, this is your first test, your first major test together, right? The Prophet ﷺ says, Ashiru alayya ayyuhan nas. He says, O people, what do you think we should do? Ashiru alayya means let's hear some opinions, right? So when the Prophet ﷺ says that, this is where, and I'm going to bring back this incident, Miqdad radiallahu ta'ala anhu speaks, and Miqdad was from the Muhajirin, right? Miqdad is from the people of Mecca. And Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, Shahidtu min al-Miqdad ibn al-Aswadi mashhada lan akuna sahibahu ahabbu ilayya mimma udira bihi. He said there was this incident, that time, I'll never forget when Miqdad stood up, when the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with us in Badr, and I wished I would have done it. Like I would do anything. I'd trade the whole world to be the one who said what Miqdad was going to say. So he stands up, and if you remember, Miqdad has a booming voice. Very, loud, strong voice, a presence. He said, لا نقول كما قال قوم موسى اذهب أنت وربك فقاتلا. We're not going to say the way the people of Musa said, go you and your Lord and fight. ولكننا نقاتل عن يمينك وعن شمالك وبين يديك وخلفك. We're going to be on your right and on your left and in front of you and behind you, Ya Rasulullah. Go ahead, we've got you. So Ibn Mas'ud said, I looked at the face of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said, أشرق وجهه وسره. Like the Prophet ﷺ's face opened up like a big smile. Like subhanAllah, to see that confidence and that love and support, but that's ultimately still coming from the Muhajirin. It's the people of Mecca. Now, after the fourth, the Prophet ﷺ still says, Ashiru alayya ayyuhan nas. So what do you think we should do, O people? And then Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he gets the hint. He says, Wallahi, لَكَأَنَّكَ تُرِيدُنَا ya Rasulullah. It seems like you're speaking about us, O Messenger of Allah, meaning the Ansar. And the Prophet ﷺ says, Na'am, I'm talking about the Ansar. I know I've got the Muhajirin, we've been fighting for 13 years, right? But it's as if you're speaking about us, the Ansar. Why? This is such an important point. The Ansar could have walked away from Badr and not fought on the side of the Prophet ﷺ, and there would have been no blame on them whatsoever, because the bay'ah, the allegiance that they took to the Prophet ﷺ, the pledge that they took, was that they would fight defensive battles in Medina against the enemies that are coming. So technically speaking, Badr could be excluded from that bay'ah. And the Prophet ﷺ knows that, and he's not going to force them and say, okay, forget about what we said. We're in Badr now, we're the outskirts of Medina, we're fighting our enemies. The idea was, we'll defend you in Medina. This is not in Medina. By the way, the Ansar made up more than 2/3 of the people that were there. So if they would have turned back, this would have been awful, right? I mean, it would have been a much smaller group of people. But look at the justice of the Prophet ﷺ. He doesn't force them. He doesn't force them. The Prophet ﷺ is honoring the pledge that they took. So when Sa'd radiallahu anhu says, كَأَنَّكَ تُرِيدُنَا, it seems like you're talking about us. As'ad is dead. Sa'd is the one who holds liwa al-Ansar. He's the one who holds the banner of the Ansar. And he says, yes. Sa'd radiallahu anhu says, as for us, فَقَدْ آمَنَّا بِكَ وَصَدَّقْنَاكَ وَشَهِدْنَا أَنَّ مَا جِئْتَ بِهِ هُوَ الْحَقِّ وَأَعْطَيْنَاكَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ عُهُودَنَا وَمَوَاثِيقَنَا. He said, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, we believed in you, O Rasulullah. We have followed you. We have witnessed, borne witness, that what you have brought forth is indeed the truth. And we've given you our pledges and our covenants on that premise. عَلَى السَّمْعِ وَالطَّاعَةِ, to hear and to obey. And he goes a step further than what Miqdad says. He says, فَامْضِي يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ لِمَا أَرَدْتَ فَنَحْنُ مَعَكَ. Go, O Messenger of Allah, and do what you're going to do. We are with you. He says, فَوَالَّذِي بَعَثَكَ بِالْحَقِّ, by the one who has sent you with the truth. He said, if you were to go into this bahr, if you were to go into the ocean, فَخُطَّهُ لَخُضْنَاهُ مَعَكَ. If you went and fought in the middle of the ocean, we would take our army and we'd go right in there with you, Ya Rasulullah. We would follow you into the water to fight these people. مَا تَخَلَّفَ مِنَّا رَجُلٌ وَاحِدٌ. Not a single one of us, he's speaking on behalf of the Ansar now, not a single one of us would leave you hanging. All of us, over 200 of us, by the way, out of an army of 313, all of us will be right there by your side. وَمَا نَكْرَهُ أَن تَلْقَى بِنَا عَدُوَّنَا غَدًا إِنَّا لَصُبُرٌ فِي الْحَرْبِ صُدُقٌ فِي اللِّقَاءِ. And nothing, we are not trying to get out of meeting the one who has opposed you, Ya Rasulullah, in any way. We are happy and we are patient in war, but we are vicious in battle. Meaning, you'll see the Ansar, we are strategic, but once we get into the trenches, Ya Rasulullah, we're going to be fighting with you. You're going to see a side of us that you have not seen. We will fight, and we will fight strong. وَلَعَلَّ اللَّهَ يُرِيَكَ مِنَّا مَا تَقَرُّ بِهِ عَيْنُكَ. And it may be that Allah is going to show you something, O Messenger of Allah, from us, meaning the Ansar, that is going to be the coolness of your eyes. That's going to bring joy to your eyes. فَسِرْ بِنَا عَلَى بَرَكَةِ اللَّهِ. Go ahead, O Messenger of Allah, with the blessing of Allah, and take us wherever you want to take us. The Prophet ﷺ had so much joy in his face. Like, this is my group of people. These are my companions. The Muhajirin and the Ansar. That moment from Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu is why he earns the nickname Siddiq al-Ansar. He's the Siddiq, the truthful one of the Ansar. Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu was the Siddiq of the Ummah. Right? He is the truthful one of the Ummah, and of course he's from the Muhajirin. But the truthfulness of Sa'd radiallahu anhu in the most defining early moment of Islam, to express that level of confidence and then to make that an identity of the Ansar. And this is basically equivalent to the role that As'ad played in the bay'ah. Remember, with the bay'ah, there's like a hesitation here. Not a hesitation of, we're not sure, but like, who's going to be the first one to do this? And As'ad is the one who gives the confidence on behalf of the Ansar and pushes them all forward to go and take that pledge with the Prophet ﷺ. Now that As'ad has died, it's Sa'd, and Sa'd is the one who stands up on that day. And because of the stand of Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, you saw the entire attitude of the Ansar that we are going to be there with you, Ya Rasulullah. We're not turning back from this. So subhanAllah, that is the quality when you read about these people in Badr, right? And they are the veterans of Islam, right? They are the veterans of Islam. The best of us are the people of Badr. And this was maintained throughout the history of Islam, right? As long as anyone from the veterans of Badr was alive, they were noted amongst the people. They were noted in the gathering. This is why. This was the quality of these people. To the point that Jibreel alayhi salam said what? Ya Rasulullah, how do you view the veterans of Badr amongst you? And the Prophet ﷺ said, the best people amongst us are the veterans of Badr. Jibreel alayhi salam says, amongst the malaika, we celebrate the veterans of Badr. The angels that fought on the day of Badr are considered the best of the malaika. They're considered the best of the angels. This is the quality of those people, and they were lined up behind people like Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. In Uhud, Sa'd radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Siddiq al-Ansar, the truthful one of the Ansar, once again, he rises up and he's one of those who does not leave the side of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's one of those that sticks with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like we mentioned with Usayd, throughout the entire battle of Uhud, and suffers multiple wounds on his behalf. Sa'd radiallahu anhu actually is the one who narrated. If you remember in the story of Mus'ab radiallahu anhu made noises to take the army away from the Prophet ﷺ. He attracted attention to himself. He basically invited his own death in Uhud when he saw that they were about to ambush the Prophet ﷺ. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh was the last person to see Mus'ab ibn Umair radiallahu ta'ala anhu do that, to strike up the dirt and to make those noises and to attract and pull the army towards him radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He went to the side of the Prophet ﷺ on that day. And Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu was amongst those, by the way, whose brother, Amr, as well as his stepson, Al-Harith ibn Aus. Remember we said Sa'd married the widow of his older brother? So the son, the stepson, Al-Harith ibn Aus, was someone who was older because he was old enough to fight in that battle. He was amongst the shuhada of Uhud. So two of them, Sa'd's brother, as well as his stepson, are amongst that group of people that were martyred at Uhud. Now, also remember the story where the Ansar were deeply, deeply grieving from the shuhada of Uhud, right? And so what they used to do was the practice of niyaha. Niyaha was to grieve. I mean, literally to wail out loud. You would grieve in front of your home. You would call out the name, or you would show your anguish at the death of the person that you lost. And at that time, niyaha had not yet been made haram. And if you remember, who was the Prophet ﷺ most sad about after Uhud? Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Sa'd was the one who saw the Prophet ﷺ come out, and he saw the Ansar, their families in the streets of Medina, all crying over their dead ones. And the Prophet ﷺ put his head down and he said, "Where are the bawaki? Where are those who cry over Hamza?" Sa'd was the one who noticed that and who heard that. And Sa'd, I'm telling you, the Ansar were such different people, subhanAllah. You have to love them for Allah. It's a ibadah, so you have to go into Ramadan with this, honestly, right? Sa'd was the one who gathered the Ansar then in front of the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and they all started to cry over Hamza, right? To show the Prophet ﷺ, your pain is our pain, Ya Rasulullah. We're in pain over our loved ones, but we know what Hamza meant to you. We too are going to come and we're going to cry by your side. And after that, niyaha was made forbidden, and the scholars say that's one of the honors of Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that he was the last person in Islam that it was permitted for, that the people would lament him in this fashion and weep loudly at his death. So he's played a pivotal role now in the hijrah, in opening up the doors in Al-Madinah. He's played a pivotal role in Badr. He has played a pivotal role in Uhud. And his most pivotal role is actually in Al-Ahzab. It's actually in the next battle and the last battle that he would be a part of. Now remember, in Al-Ahzab now, this is after Uhud, all of the armies have gathered to wipe out the Muslims. Okay? They've come from all over to wipe out the Muslims, and of course they built the trench, the Khandaq. Now, what makes matters worse, of course, far worse, is that they realized as they built the trench that they were also betrayed from the inside. So they not only had to worry about from the enemies from without, they had to worry about the enemies from within. The Prophet ﷺ comes to know that Banu Qurayza is plotting against him sallallahu alaihi wasallam and actively coordinating with the outside to attack from this side while they attack from the outside of the trench. This is a catastrophic situation. Catastrophic situation. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, إِذْ جَاءُوكُم مِّن فَوْقِكُمْ وَمِنْ أَسْفَلَ مِنْكُمْ وَإِذْ زَاغَتِ الْأَبْصَارُ وَبَلَغَتِ الْقُلُوبُ الْحَنَاجِرُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, remember when they came to you from every direction, and your eyes were wide in horror, and your hearts were in your throats. That's how afraid you were, right? At the situation. Once you know, I mean, you spent all this time trying to build a protection mechanism from those on the outside, and you come to realize that you're actually going to be attacked from the inside as well. The Muslims could not afford a lapse in the trench. It would literally be the end of them, right? Because if the Meccans could penetrate in any way into that trench, they were going to wipe out everybody. And so every part of the trench had to be manned. And they're running out of food and drink, and they're under siege in Medina, and now Banu Qurayza is plotting against them. Now, this situation is particularly close to the heart of Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh, because Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh was the leader of Aus, and Aus had an alliance with Banu Qurayza. So basically, Sa'd radiallahu anhu is very close to Banu Qurayza. He knows them, they trust him. He has been part of holding all of the tribes together, holding this peace in Al-Madinah. And now Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu understands that Banu Qurayza has betrayed the Prophet ﷺ and is seeking a way to attack the Prophet ﷺ from the inside. So the Prophet ﷺ, he calls a Sa'dan, the two Sa'ds, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh and Sa'd ibn Ubadah. And the Prophet ﷺ is asking for advice as to what to do. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, what if we were to make a deal, for example, with one of the tribes, Ghatafan, to actually, if they break their pact with Quraysh, then we will give them a certain share of our crops in Al-Madinah. Like the Prophet ﷺ is thinking about negotiation things, and the two Sa'ds basically say to the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Rasulullah, this is not going to work with them, and you have our support, we'll figure it out. Right, we'll figure it out. So Rasulullah ﷺ sends them, the two Sa'ds, to investigate the situation, to sort of go back inside Al-Madinah now, and to dig deep into what is happening. So Sa'd goes to Banu Qurayza, and they let him in. Okay, they love Sa'd. They stand for him, they let him in, they invite him into the fortress. And Sa'd radiallahu anhu pretends to not know anything. So when they get comfortable, they start to say to Sa'd, remember the old days before these people came from Mecca and this man came from Mecca and ruined everything between us? If only it could go back to those days, and in fact, we'll take it back to those days. They start to make their threats very clear, and sort of, in their comfort with him, they're basically confirming to him that we've got something up our sleeves, but Sa'd, you'll be okay, we've got your back. Right? We love you, and remember how it used to be before Islam came and corrupted all of this, before it messed up all of our power structure and all this stuff, let's take it back to the old days. But they're in a way, by even letting him in on that, they're kind of saying don't worry, we'll take care of the heads, our old friends and our allies in this regard. So Sa'd just plays along. He doesn't say anything. Comes back, and he says to the Prophet ﷺ, or he informs the Prophet ﷺ what had happened. Now, subhanAllah, that was actually prior to the moment that Banu Qurayza started to actually attack. And there are a few things that happened there. The women were actually in a fortress, right? So the women and the children were the most accessible people to Banu Qurayza at the moment. And Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she was with the mother of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh comes to visit his mother, and as Sa'd is leaving, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she says, subhanAllah, I remember saying to his mom, I wish he wore armor on his arms as well. Because Sa'd was wearing a bodysuit, but his arms were exposed. The shield, the armor that he was wearing, the body armor that he was wearing was sleeveless. And Aisha was saying to the mother of Sa'd, I wish he would cover his arms as well, be a little bit more careful with everything that's taking place. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would decree that he would indeed be struck in the place that his armor was not covering. So Aisha was recalling those moments in the fortress where she had said to the mother those words. Now, Banu Qurayza, did they try to attack the women? They actually did. They actually did attack the women and children. However, there was one woman that rose, and you can go back and listen to her biography. Innaha Safiya bint Abd al-Muttalib, the aunt of the Prophet ﷺ. Does anyone know who was her son? Az-Zubayr, the mother of Az-Zubayr radiallahu anhu. Remember? Ibn Safiya. Right? Safiya bint Abd al-Muttalib was was a strong, strong, strong woman. Okay? And the Prophet ﷺ used to say about her, "Innaha Safiya," right? Like she's something else. She is something else. And you know what? She showed it that day because when Banu Qurayza approached, Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he's a poet, he's not a warrior. He was with the women and the children. So when they were coming, they're like looking at Hassan ibn Thabit to go do something. Hassan ibn Thabit saying, "I froze up," right? As Banu Qurayza is approaching. Safiya, she went behind the door. The first man that came in, she popped him with a pole, and then she picked up his body and threw it out. And when they saw the man's body thrown out, they all ran away because they thought that the army was actually there in the fortress, that they read their plot and that they foiled it, and they thought there was probably going to be a bunch of warriors there. It was just Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib radiallahu ta'ala anha that averted that crisis, right? But the point is that, you know, Banu Qurayza had really transgressed every single limit here, right? In this treason, in trying to attack the Prophet ﷺ from inside. And subhanAllah, Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was, as he was leaving, this is where a man by the name of Ibn Ariqah threw a spear at him from a distance, and it struck him in his arm. Okay? And when it struck him in his arm, he says, "Khudha minni wa ana ibn Ariqah." He said, "Take it from me, and I am the son of Ariqah." Ariqah, of course, means sweat. Ariq means sweat. So Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu responded, he says, "Ariqah bika fi nar," may you sweat in hell. But that strike to his arm obviously popped something, because they said that the blood started to squirt from the upper arm of Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So it struck something that was significant. And Sa'd radiallahu anhu basically started to bleed out, okay, from the strike. Now subhanAllah, in that moment he could have died. But his dua was very interesting. I want you to listen to his dua. And this is just the sidq, the truthfulness of a man. As he's struck and as he's, you know, reasonably about to die in that moment, and the people are coming to tend to him and try to patch him up and keep his life, he looks up and he says, "Allahumma, oh Allah, in kunta abqayta min harbi Qurayshin shay'a," if you have willed that there is still any battle left with Quraysh, فَأَبْقِنِي لَهَا, then let me live to see that battle. فَإِنَّهُ لَا قَوْمَ أَحَبَّ إِلَيَّ أَنْ أُجَاهِدَهُمْ مِنْ قَوْمٍ آذَوْا رَسُولَكَ وَكَذَّبُوهُ وَأَخْرَجُوهُ. He said, I would not love to fight a people more than them, because they hurt your prophet and they expelled him from his land and they belied him. SubhanAllah, he's saying, Ya Allah, I'm about to die, but Ya Allah, if there is anything left with those people, this is his love for the Prophet ﷺ, right? This is not ego. These people used to kill each other over what? The names of their tribes, right? He's saying, if there is anything left from fighting Quraysh, Ya Allah, let me live to see the very last battle with Quraysh because of their hurt for the Prophet ﷺ. And Allah would will it, by the way, that there would be no more battles with Quraysh after this, right? After Khandaq, that was it. It's Hudaybiyah, it's the Fath, and that's it. So Allah would will it as such. And then he says, Allahumma wa in kunta qad wada'tu al-harba baynana wa baynahum. And oh Allah, if you have decreed that our war with Quraysh is over, then he says, فَجْعَلْهُ لِي شَهَادَةً, then let this be my moment of shahada. But, I mean, look at all of these conditions he's placing in his dua. He says, وَلَا تُمِتْنِي حَتَّى تُقِرَّ عَيْنِي مِنْ بَنِي قُرَيْظَةَ. Do not let me die until I see the judgment of Bani Qurayza with my own eyes. This was his people, and this is, the tribe that he had an allyship with, that betrayed the Prophet ﷺ from inside. So from his love of the Prophet ﷺ, basically he's saying, Ya Allah, I want to go as a shaheed. But most of us, we just ask for shahada and that's it, right? But the Siddiqun, subhanAllah, these people like Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, look at their level of dua. Ya Allah, let me live to see the battle with Quraysh, if that's still going to take place. And if it's not, then let me live to see the judgment of Banu Qurayza. After that, Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu became extreme. He was basically immobilized from that wound, right? And they set up a tent for him in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. And Rasulullah ﷺ used to go and visit him every single day. and he would stay with him for a long time. He said the Prophet ﷺ used to rush to his tent, like every day, like it was like the first thing that he wants to do, ﷺ. He'd finish his salah and he'd go straight to the tent of Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Every single day, to go and visit with him, to go and to sit with him radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And of course, what ends up happening after Khandaq, Jibreel alayhi salam comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said that you have put down what you have put down, but we, the angels, are still continuing. وَأَشَارَ إِلَى بَنِي قُرَيْظَةَ, and he told the Prophet ﷺ to proceed towards Banu Qurayza, towards the fortress of Banu Qurayza. Sa'd radiallahu anhu did not live to actually fight against Banu Qurayza. Of course, we know that the famous story that Allah gave the Prophet ﷺ victory after 25 days under the banner of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But essentially, once the Prophet ﷺ, is granted victory over them, they say to the Prophet ﷺ, they surrender and they say to the Prophet ﷺ, but we want a judge other than you. Now, I mean, what kind of army under siege says we want someone other than you? Like, they throw that back at the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ says that would you be happy with your Halif Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh, your ally Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh? You want justice? Fine. They committed high treason. This is the highest order of treason. There is no code of ethics anywhere in the world, right, that would excuse what they did, and they had intentions to kill the men, women, and children and to end the Muslims from inside, right? But the Prophet ﷺ says, would you be happy with Sa'd ibn Mu'adh? And they said that we would be happy with Sa'd ibn Mu'adh because he's the Halif, he is our ally, we remember him, we trust him, he's a just man, and we have that relationship with him. So the Prophet ﷺ, when that message gets back to Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu literally had to be carried over because of how little was left of his life. And while he's being carried, the hypocrites, the munafiqun, are surrounding him on his stretcher and trying to convince him, right, to betray the Prophet ﷺ or to mess this up. And Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu says, this is not the time, and أَخَافَ لَوْمَةَ لَائِمٍ, that I will fear the blame of a blamer. This is not the time I'm going to betray my position with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he continues forward. Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu is brought forth, and the Prophet ﷺ says, قُومُوا لِسَيِّدِكُمْ, stand for your leader. This is actually where this sentence comes from, that the people should stand for their Sayyid. So the Prophet ﷺ affirms the rank of Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The people stand for Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu is then sat up and he says, are you all in agreement with me as the arbiter, as the judge in this regard? Banu Qurayza says, we are pleased. He's too shy to look directly at the Prophet ﷺ. He looks in the direction of the Muslims and he says, are you all pleased? And they said, Rasulullah ﷺ says, yes. Go ahead and pass your judgment. So Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu gave the judgment that the men would be killed. Okay, which is, by the way, the law of Deuteronomy, the law that they would have gone by as well. And they thought that maybe the old tribal connection could get them out of this. Okay? And when he said that, they started to curse him and they started to yell at him. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the judgment of Sa'd matched the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That he judged righteously, that this was a situation. And you can't say the Prophet ﷺ did not used to forgive his enemies. He used to do it all the time. But this situation was a different situation, right? So after that, Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu is taken back to his tent. And within days, Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu dies. Within days of that. So his dua was answered as he said. He died a shaheed because he died from the wound that he suffered in Khandaq. Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, they actually, the way they described, they saw the blood flowing from under the tent. And they knew that Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu had passed away. The Prophet ﷺ goes to him, and this is where you see the ultimate legacy of this man. And I elaborate it more in the episode that we have in Angels 2. I'm not saying that to be annoying, I'm saying that because I can't go into the full details of it now. But you go and you watch that episode and we talk about the presence of the malaika, how many angels were present. But the main thing is the Prophet ﷺ says, اهتز عرش الرحمن لموت Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh. The throne of Allah, Ar-Rahman, just shook out of the death of Sa'd Ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala. How great of a human being do you have to be for the throne of Allah to shake at your death? Now, by the way, why did it shake? Farahan bihi, out of joy of his soul returning, because arwah al-shuhada, the souls of the shuhada, are in chandeliers that are hanging from the arsh, from the throne of Ar-Rahman. And so, just like when Sa'd walks in and everyone stands for their Sayyid, the shuhada are waiting to receive Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. Ar-Rahman is waiting to receive the soul of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. There is joy in the heavens for the reception of this man radiallahu ta'ala anhu, to the point that the throne of Ar-Rahman, ihtazza, the throne of Ar-Rahman shook out of joy of his return. And the Prophet ﷺ, when they performed the janazah, they said that the body of Sa'd, it was as if it was floating. They picked up his body and they felt no weight to it. And the hypocrites, what did they say? They mocked. They said that it's because he has no weight. They mocked him, like he's a man of no measure. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ said, that's because the ones that were carrying him were the malaika. You imagine the angels competing to carry the body of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu to his burial. And the Prophet ﷺ led his janazah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The man was only Muslim for 6 years. 5.5, 6 years. And that's the thing, subhanAllah, that it is simply mind-blowing to think about the greatness of this man. To have been Muslim for that long and to have that virtue written for you like no other person. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala anhu. I'll give you one more incident. I know that we've gone a little over time today. But this shows you the powerful remembrance. My favorite part of this again is always the aftermath. Sa'd ibn Zurara, people making dua for him years later, remembering the first time he established Jum'ah. Here, the Prophet ﷺ is standing up on the minbar. And the Prophet ﷺ was wearing a very nice garment that he had received from a foreign emissary. And Rasulullah ﷺ, when someone would bring him a cloth from Abyssinia, from Yemen, from different places, the Messenger ﷺ would wear it. So this happened to be the nicest garment that they ever saw the Prophet ﷺ wear. So the Prophet ﷺ comes out on the day of Jum'ah, and the Sahaba literally started to feel on his garment. And they were saying, Ya Rasulullah, this is an incredible garment. This is a beautiful cloth. And Rasulullah ﷺ did not used to buy these types of clothes, right? When the foreign emissaries brought it, the Prophet ﷺ accepted the gift, he wore it. And that was a way of validating a people, that was a way of validating a friendship and a relationship, right? So it was the nicest thing they ever saw the Prophet ﷺ wearing. And what does the Prophet ﷺ say? And this is, subhanAllah, this is where you don't just freeze these people in history, but you take the concept of it. Rasulullah ﷺ said, do you think this garment is worth anything? And the Prophet ﷺ says, فَوَاللَّهِ, I swear by Allah, لَمَنَادِيلُ سَعْدٍ فِي الْجَنَّةِ, the handkerchief of Sa'd in Jannah, أَحْسَنُ مِمَّا تَرَوْنَ, is better than this thobe. The little handkerchief of Sa'd in Jannah is better than this thobe. Like, don't get deluded by this stuff. Right? That man, what Allah has blessed him with, is so much greater than anything else that you could pursue of this world. Prophet ﷺ praising that, reminding us that you seek status with Ar-Rahman, you seek status with the most merciful, the way that Sa'd ibn Mu'adh did with the most merciful. SubhanAllah, he could have easily taken a route like Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul. Said, I'm the leader, if this man comes, I lose all my claims to leadership, right? Sa'd ibn Mu'adh had a lot to lose by bringing in the Prophet ﷺ. He could have reasonably been amongst those that competed for the throne of a kingdom that would be made for Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, that he would want to fight. He could have made that claim that I will be the king of Yathrib. And he relinquished that throne for the sake of Allah. And who did he become? The man for whom the throne of Allah shook. If that's not a lesson, I don't know what is. وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى, and the hereafter is better and everlasting. Radiyallahu ta'ala an Sa'd, may Allah have mercy and be pleased with Sa'd radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Elevate him, elevate his rank. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to have a fate where we are amongst the righteous souls And amongst those who are in chandeliers hanging from the throne of Ar-Rahman, amongst those whose handkerchiefs in Jannah, whose clothes in Jannah are their adornment that they seek. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be amongst these companions, amongst the righteous, amongst the prophets. وَحَسُنَ أُولَٰئِكَ رَفِيقًا. And what a wonderful companionship that would be. Allahumma ameen.